it was a great panel discussion we had this morning,
Yeah.
don't you think?
Mm-hmm.
And I understood from what you said that you guys send out a lot of confirmation emails, is that right?
Yeah, so right now, in terms of the way that the business was originally set up, everything started out being very engineering based. So engineers were the first ones to really set up the email program. And from their perspective, it was very much just about calculating based on engagement, who should get what email next.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was always very data driven in terms of, like behavior from the site and kind of triggering based on that. But there wasn't really a lot of thought put into the strategy. It was just kind of send as many emails as possible. The more emails we send, the better. And so that was kind of where it came from. And so the person who was in the role just before me, she actually started to kind of get them to start thinking more strategically about, okay, well, what makes sense to actually be sending, and thinking more about the full customer lifecycle. And so she got them to transition from having everything being sent from the code base to now being on a platform. So we're with Iterable.
And that's where you came in?
Yes, and so then I came in. And so now we're still kind of in that early phase where most of the stuff that we're sending out is still the confirmation and alert-based stuff. But I'm really looking forward to the opportunity to having a huge impact and being able to build a full customer journey.
And that's your work for the following year?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So right now, it's kind of interesting because when I came in, I thought that I would be mostly doing the consumer side of things, but we have just started working with dealers directly in terms of sourcing our listings. And so now we're kind of touching that other side of the marketplace. And so with that, there's a lot of stuff that needs to be done there as well. So we have a lot of focus and attention there right now, just because as we're starting to sign on dealers and onboard with them, we really need to be able to find a way to kind of showcase and prove our value. And so with that, we need to be able to kind of gather even more data. And so it's all kind of very new for the business. So a lot of my efforts have been focused on, like I mentioned, there's an email that we send out now to kind of close the loop on whether or not the car was purchased. And then we're also starting to do some cold emailing to dealers, trying to do some more marketing stuff to be able to kind of get our brand out there, have dealers become aware of us, and then hopefully sign on with us as direct dealers.
Right. So it seems to me that any industry could also find the consumer journey within the website behavior. Is that right?
Yeah.
It's not just automobiles.
No, yeah, for sure. So I think a lot of times other e-commerce sites as well, right? They can track kind of your behavior on the site, what items you've looked at, what items you've added to your cart, but maybe not followed through with the purchase. I think it's all kind of using the same type of technology to track all of that.
So what are some of the learnings you took away from this experience with the consumers before you started with the dealers?
Just from looking at like tracking their behavior and such. It's interesting. I think it's just really hard to tell, I think, what the intent is, because I have no clue where they are in their buying cycle, but I also don't know what other competitors they might be using.
Oh, right.
Which is a big deal, because I think that oftentimes, when you're looking for a car, you are shopping around, right? You're not really looking at just one. And I think that most consumers, when they come to visit us, they've likely either already visited a competitor and they're using them as a resource as well, or down the road, they'll also be looking at other competitors coming up. So, yeah, in that sense, it's just kind of trying to figure out, I think, what can we do to really anticipate their needs better than what our competitors are doing, and being able to kind of surface that and hopefully keep them loyal to using our platform.
And that's all with the use of email?
Right now, yes. So unfortunately, again, because it's kind of coming from that whole engineering background, their view is that I'm an email marketer, which means I only do email. And so we actually also have push alerts, which again are just kind of right now in the space of alerting. So new listings, price drops. But again, those are not entirely in my control. They are something that the engineering team originally set up. So that's using Google Firebase, and then it actually sends directly from our code base. It's not something that I have any visibility into or control over right now. So yeah, ideally, as part of my roadmap, I would also like to actually transition those push messages into our Iterable platform. And then that way I can have a much more holistic picture of, maybe a user didn't engage with the email, but they did engage with the push. And then that way I won't, I'll be able to kind of tailor the messaging so that I'm not hitting them again with additional emails. And then also, if it turns out that push is their preferred method, then that way I'll know ahead of, later on down the road to start using more push instead of email.
Yeah, it's important to get that
the channel preference.
Feedback, because a lot of people want to called on the phone,
Yeah.
which I don't.
Yeah.
So it's like, no, just email me or
Yeah.
push or
Yeah,
whatever. So,
exactly.
Yeah, great. So you said that you started off with the email under your engineers, right? And then moved it into your marketing. Can you tell me a little bit more about that process exactly and whether it created goodwill or bad will?
Yeah, I think that it's something that probably at a lot of startups you kind of run into, where they start out with engineers, build the product, and then start getting users. And growth is obviously a very big part of every startup. But then you kind of start getting into the realm of realizing, well, retention is also very key to growing the business. And then that's when they'll usually make their first kind of like life cycle or marketing hire. And then that's when you kind of have that first, I think, moment where, now you're kind of butting heads a little bit and saying like, hey, like as the marketer, I need a lot more control over this in order to be able to produce, the right types of campaigns and have the right type of impact.
Sure.
So with that, I wasn't there for the official process of the transition, but I can imagine that it was pretty difficult. I actually know the girl who was in my role before me. She and I are good friends, and from her perspective, I know that it was a bit of an uphill battle, just because I think that from an engineering perspective, it's all so black and white, right? Everything is so straightforward in that sense where, okay, you send an email, you drive sessions, the more sessions we have, the more revenue we get, boom, like that's the equation. So just send more emails. And so they really kind of set up their algorithms to optimize for just sending out as much volume as possible. So when she came in, I know that one of the biggest issues they had was actually around deliverability and inboxing. So I think they had to fix a little bit of some of their, best practices around sending to kind of get deliverability better. And then once that was in a good place, they also needed to focus on actually inboxing, right? Because there's a difference between deliverability and inboxing.
Tell me what that is.
Yeah, so I think on the deliverability side, that's much more on kind of like the technical setup behind the email and whether or not it even gets delivered. But then I think inbox is another issue where it's kind of like which tab do you wind up getting sent to? Are you hitting spam instead and that type of stuff?
Okay.
And so they worked really hard, and she worked really closely with SendGrid support. That was who we were originally sending from. And then also when we started transitioning to Iterable, she was working with all of them to kind of work on strategies to help get that to a good place. And so I know that just before she left, it finally got to a place where they were, feeling really good about it. They had transitioned all of their core, confirmations and alerts over to Iterable.
Yeah.
And so then just before she left, she gave a presentation on the state of email and said like, hey, look guys, like we made all these cuts to volume, but look at how much better the emails are performing. And just you could see in her graph, like over time, like the volume was up here and the engagement was down here. But then by the time she left, the volume was down here, but the engagement was all the way up here.
So it was quality over quantity.
Yes, exactly.
Yes,
And so I think that was very interesting. And I think for her, in order to really be able to make that transition and build goodwill with the engineering team, it was really something that she had to kind of fight for and also prove. So I think that she probably had to do a lot of research and a lot of, kind of collaboration with the deliverability experts and the strategic support from the different platforms that we were using, and then kind of come back and say like, look, here's the plan, and really give kind of, I think more concrete numbers, kind of around like, this is what we need to do. It'll probably, cut volume by this much, but we can probably also expect to see this much of a lift in engagement, and really be able to tell that story to convince them.
She had to convince them that that would happen.
Yes,
And she
exactly. Yes, she did. Yeah, it very, very much paid off, I would say. Yeah.
Lucy, it was wonderful to have you here today and to have you explain in more depth the stuff that you said in your panel discussion. I really enjoyed learning more about it.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. I think this, as well as being on the panel, it's a really great opportunity for me to practice some of my public speaking skills and kind of get my brand out there as well.
Great.
Thank you.